Good evening. Welcome to the big question on NDTV Profit. I'm Vikram Oza. Of course, there is no doubt that India's digital economy is booming. But we have to be honest. Have you ever felt that the boom is happening at your expense because you click on a free trial on something, suddenly your card is charged for 3 months? You try booking a cab and just before you confirm, the fare has jumped. Or that shopping cart on an e-commerce app, somehow it always manages to sneak in that add-on that you did not actually ask for. So these little design tricks, you can call them nudges, you can call them traps, forced consents, hidden fees even, they have a collective name and they're called dark patterns. They're everywhere in digital lending apps, they're in edtech, subscriptions, even the country's biggest e-commerce platforms. Flipkart has conducted a self-audit to check its own practices. And from what my reporter colleague is picking up from her sources, running these audits is what the government is pushing for as well. So here's the big question tonight. Will India's digital boom be derailed by dark patterns? Are these platforms innovating to keep us engaged, or are they simply exploiting us under the guise of convenience? And if clean platforms are the norm rather than the exception, is this now the single biggest threat to consumer rights in our digital present, our digital future? You would believe it is if you look at the kind of survey results that are coming through. There are a few tricks of the trade. A new local circles survey is spotting them, and they are showing that 97% of platforms still use dark patterns despite government advisories. Only 3% manage to stay clean, from digital lending to travel to e-commerce and quick commerce, even your favorite OTT apps. They are all among the worst offenders, according to this survey that Local Circles has conducted. To walk us through the numbers, to set the context for this discussion, let me toss it first to my colleague from our research team. Jasmeet is joining us. Jasmeet.
Well, right, thank you for that. So here are the key takeaways from the survey, and what we see in the survey is roughly 97% of the overall platforms still continue to use the dark patterns even after the government has despite given the advisory. We see a minimal ratio of 3% which have made the changes in the platform from the dark patterns. While if you look at in general, the dark pattern used the most would be forced action, which is at 73% of them, which technically means forcing the consumer to add something when they don't want it. While if you look at the other top 3 patterns which are used most by these platforms, the second one would be drip pricing, which means adding extra fee at the final step of the order. And the next one would be bait and switch, which means showing a particular pricing and then changing it at the final order. If you look at the platforms that are using this, and we have this list of platforms which use more than 7 of these dark patterns, starting off with digital lending, then we have travel. We also have platforms like airline, edtech, which use such dark patterns in the everyday platforms. It's something to watch out how after further advisories will this make changes and lead for a better consumer experience.
Yes, indeed. We'll be watching out for that. Thanks very much. The numbers really bring home how widespread these dark patterns have become. So let's open up this debate. Our panel is joining us. Sachin Taparia is actually from Local Circles. They've conducted that survey. For a policy and legal standpoint, we have Shalini Satiprasad. She's a partner at JSA. From the industry side, Madhav Kasturia is there, founder and CEO of Zippy. And for a public policy perspective, we have Aparajita Bharti of the Quantum Hub. And on the issue of consumer awareness about dark patterns, Manisha Kapoor, CEO and Secretary General of the Advertising Standards Council of India, is also on our panel. Thanks all for making the time. Sachin Taparia, to you first. These findings that we are looking at from your survey, tell us how prevalent these practices are. Does it also show that dark patterns are directly coming at the cost of consumer rights?
Absolutely, Vikram. You know, we've been on this subject for about 24 months now. And the latest, quarterly audit basically shows, and this is, inputs for about 290 platforms in the country. So anything you can imagine, from IRCTC to airline apps, to e-commerce, to taxi apps, everything that a lot of people use in their daily lives basically has been covered. And what we find there, like you showed, is majority, a whopping majority essentially of 97% still have dark patterns. Despite the government advisory, despite the guidelines that were issued in 2023, companies and platforms have not taken this seriously.
Why not? Why not is the question. Let's ask the industry. Madhav Kasturia is here. Madhav, why do digital businesses opt for dark patterns as a tactic? Is it about survival in a hyper-competitive market? Is it simply about padding profits at the cost of a consumer?
You know what? In fact, we've had this conversation earlier also, and Sachin's been on the panel previously also when we were discussing dark patterns. If you actually look at it and you zoom out and understand why these patterns exist, these are not patterns that only exist in the digital consumption era. If you go back in time 20, 30, 40 years, right, even in retail consumption, when you're checking out, when you're standing at the counter getting your billing done, the person is upselling something. The person is creating urgency to you at a retail store where you're going and buying electronics. So this is maybe the last piece left, right? So all that's happened is all of these tactics have been digitized. So you don't see a person, you don't see a face in front of it, but you just see certain tactics in the flow, in the user flow that makes it a more slippery slope. I would more call them marketing tactics rather than manipulation on these platforms. And it's just been productized in a very good way, which some people feel this is called dark patterns.
So you're saying this is a legit marketing tactic. Aparajita, do you agree from a public policy standpoint? Are these dark patterns an outcome of weak regulation in India? Would they be considered as an okay marketing practice to have? Or are we seeing the unintended consequences of trying to drive digital adoption too quickly in the country?
Thanks, Vikram. And I think, I empathize with policymakers because this is a hard problem to solve.
Okay.
And like any other tricky public policy problem, often the answer lies somewhere in the middle. So I think one of the things that we have to think about is that regulation can only do so much when it comes to things like dark patterns, because as the panelist just before me said, it's hard to make a distinction between what is innovation, what is a marketing practice, and what qualifies as dark pattern. And I think while the government has sort of laid down what the intention of the policymaker is through the guidelines which were issued in 2023, it is very hard to really say if something is a dark pattern or not, because convenience is also something that is important for consumers. And a lot of times for digital platforms, their main competitive edge over other platforms is actually the user interface. Somebody may use a platform Z instead of Y only because it is more convenient, even though it's serving the same function. So I think there is limited achievement that we can get from regulation. We need things like what Sachin is doing right now, which is also contributing to consumer awareness, and also create incentives for platforms so that they have reputational harms if they are doing something which is harming the interest of the consumers.
No, but how do you nail that? Like you pointed out, it's so difficult to nail the definition of what is a dark pattern and what isn't. Manisha Kapoor, do you agree? From the consumer awareness side, most people don't even realize that they are being manipulated when they see a drip pricing, when they see forced actions or false urgency. How big is that gap in awareness, and what should watchdogs like yours, like ASCII, what should they be doing?
Yeah, I would say that different dark patterns, are understood in different ways by consumers. I think all of us as consumers get irritated when we see that, the headline price was, let's say, 10 rupees, and eventually we've had to pay 15 or 20. So I think some dark patterns are more easily discernible. But yes, it is not uniformly easy to make out what may be a dark pattern. And I also think that in this case, it's very difficult to put the burden of understanding whether you've been manipulated or not on the consumer, because these are very tricky territories for even consumers to navigate. And therefore, I think, the regulation, of course, needs to be in place, but also how do you execute that, how do you implement that, is something that, we need to think seriously about.
But Manisha, you're saying that it is difficult for consumers. Indeed it is, which is why we need regulation perhaps. And Shalini, Sati Prasad, weigh in on this. Legally speaking, how effective are our existing frameworks to be able to deal with this?
See, we are looking at a very progressive regulatory framework now coming into picture. There were guidelines, the 2023 guidelines that we have looked at. And recently, the guidelines are taking shape in the form of various diktats to the e-commerce platforms, conduct self-regulatory assessments and submit a report. And I think this is a step in the right direction. Apart from that, you see, the guidelines are also framed under the Consumer Protection Act. And again, under the Act, we have Section 89, which deals with the punishments for any violation thereof. So to say that the framework is, of course, in place, I won't say that it's a tiger with a lot of teeth right now, but it's going in the right direction. And we are now looking at something that internationally other countries are also following these days.
So indeed, when it comes to compliance, do we need stronger measures? Do we need sharper penalties as well to make platforms fall in line? But of course, after the definitions come through. In fact, on that point, a major development that we're reporting over here on NDTV Profit, we're learning that the Consumer Affairs Ministry is moving now on dark patterns. Sources are saying that the ministry is all set to release the names of companies that are complying with the instructions on dark pattern audit. So companies like Amazon and Flipkart and Swiggy and several others, they're under the government's radar for sure. My colleague Aishwarya has been tracking this. She's got the exclusive information and she's joining us from Delhi. Just let's listen into her. Aishwarya.
Well, dark patterns has been a menace for quite some time, and the Consumer Affairs Ministry has been cracking down on some of these dark patterns. What we've been given to understand is that the Consumer Affairs Ministry will soon be coming out with some of the names, list of companies who have started complying with dark patterns audits that they had been asked to do earlier as well. The firms have begun submitting audit reports to the ministry is what we're learning from our sources, and those yet to comply are being nudged by the ministry as well in order to take a look at some of these dark patterns that may exist on e-commerce platforms as well as online portals. The ministry, if you remember earlier, had asked back in June as well as May 2025 to companies such as Amazon, Flipkart, Swiggy, Zomato, JioMart, Make My Trip, Ola, Uber, etc., and among others, that they should keep a check on some of these dark patterns and eliminate or weed out these dark patterns so as to protect consumers from some sort of unwanted purchases as well. They have asked the e-commerce platforms as well as online portals to conduct audits and weed out or eliminate these dark patterns. And the companies have also been directed to submit these reports is what we're learning.
So that's the exclusive information that we have about the way in which the ministry is moving against dark patterns. Sachin, is this going to be enough? What Aishwarya is telling us, that they are soon going to start naming companies, but they're naming companies that are actually complying with the audits. From your surveys, do you believe the opposite could hold true? Naming and shaming, could that help change behavior? Or do you think companies need a stronger kind of stick to actually comply? But of course, nailing the problem and defining what dark patterns are is going to be at the heart of it.
No, absolutely, Vikram. I think the ministry would be well advised to, put it out that these are the companies that have claimed through their self-audit that they are dark pattern free. Because, as of yesterday, we are finding that, companies who may think that they are dark pattern free still have dark patterns because they have done this analysis from the standpoint of their technology team and not from the consumer lens. So I'd be very curious to understand what are all some of these companies, and if truly there are companies, there is that 3% in our study that has come out to be dark pattern free. I think it's that good example that needs to be used here to inspire others.
Yes.
But
do they need to be the big guns? They need to be the big guns who are complying. Is that going to set the tone, as it were, for others to fall in line?
Absolutely. Just to add there a little, Vikram, basically, one of the things that the ministry did earlier was they called out this law as something that is for the e-commerce sector. Yes. And I think that was a little bit misleading because, online is much bigger than e-commerce, right? You have OTT, you have taxi apps, you have airlines, right? You have IRCTC. I mean, IRCTC in our data has got 5 or 6 dark patterns, and I'm sure everybody on this panel has experienced them, right? So I think it's a whole host of services that Indians transact with or interface with on a daily basis, basically, that come under the umbrella of dark patterns. So what I would like to see here is that the ministry the CCPA and the Consumer Affairs, they
Yes.
don't do this as a standalone. They actually engage IRDAI, they engage RBI, they engage SEBI, they engage TRAI. I mean, telecom apps
Correct.
where you pay your bills have dark patterns, right?
Right. So the
all
regulators
these-
need to step in and they need to
Yes.
ensure compliance. But Madhav,
Absolutely.
tell me, how central are dark patterns to businesses today? If you talk about user growth, if you talk about revenues, how directly tied are dark patterns as of now to your business? If tomorrow regulation bites down hard, do you think the startup ecosystem will need alternative models that are both profitable and also ethical?
I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. While a lot of you guys think of these features and flows as dark patterns, but that's not how this exists. A lot of these are actually pushing engagement. They're actually making the entire user journey more fun and engaging, rather than sort of the intention is not dark patterns. Right now, giving an example, somebody checking out with a basket of 2, 3, 4 SKUs on a quick commerce app, right on the checkout, the charges are stacked into one line item, which has a small round eye on the right hand side. You press on that eye and you see the layered line items of all the costs stacked to it, right? While you may say that's a dark pattern, but actually maybe the design team has ensured that the user flow is much more smooth, right? So that the user can check out eventually and can track the order rather than seeing 5 different line items, right? It may lead to cart abandonment. So teams at these larger e-commerce and quick commerce platforms are always only ensuring that the user journey is smooth and is fun and engaging while the users are actually choosing. Nobody's forced to purchase anything. It's all by consent.
Right. But you're not agreeing that there is a business tactic which is about ensuring that the profits are pushed up higher. And for that, you're going to consider consumer behavior. How they perform on apps is going to be at the back of your mind when you're designing.
But that's not e-commerce and quick commerce and travel commerce and hospitality commerce. That's eventually how businesses run, right? Let's go 50 years back in time. We understand that when you're actually going to a mall or to a retail store, buying a packet of chips or buying 1 kg of rice, the shopkeeper on the counter upsells you another pack, maybe a pack of dal as well, right? So upselling, creating urgency is not something that is only e-commerce centric or quick commerce centric.
Upselling and urgency are not central to the way we do business in the digital economy. Sachin, what do you make of that?
I would like to add that there is a difference here. I know Madhav touched on this earlier as well. See, when you are checking out at a store or at a local market store, or it could be a departmental store, and you are carrying your cart to the checkout counter, you don't have suddenly a salesman go and put an umbrella in your cart because it's rainy season outside. Right?
Right.
That never happens. They could try to upsell you that here is a new product and pitch it to you, but you don't put something in a user's or a consumer's basket without their knowledge, basically,
Right.
and say, look, this is not dark pattern. This is very clearly dark pattern.
Correct.
Upselling, I
Yes.
totally understand.
Right.
Showing the prices and the additional charges, as long as they are displayed to me, I think is not a dark pattern.
Correct.
But adding something at the very last step when my total was 240 and charging 255 on my credit card, that is a very clear dark pattern. I think that's what we're talking about.
That's what that difference is, something that consumers are not naturally aware, or at least are not alert at the time of shopping, the entire experience. At one level, we're talking about the digital economy, making it more convenient, Manisha Kapoor. But at the other end, of course, when the entire shopping experience is unfolding, your mind is not totally geared to whether you're being upsold something. That's not what you're doing when you're actually out there shopping. Do you agree with that? More awareness is required. And do you see watchdog bodies like yours playing a role in spreading more awareness campaigns that show people what to look out for so that they can make informed choices?
No, absolutely. And I think, Sachin pointed this out, and I think even the examples that Madhav gave, I mean, there are differences. When does a marketing tactic become a dark pattern? It becomes a dark pattern when it involves manipulation and when it impairs the consumer's ability to make an informed choice. So you try and upsell to a consumer, the consumer kind of agrees to it and purchases it, absolutely fine. So I think we have to look at the consumer detriment when we look at dark patterns.
Yes.
So one of the things that we did also, I think, very reflective of the work that Sachin and his team have done, is that in 2024, we also did a study with very similar findings. So I think in that sense, unfortunately, we are not seeing the needle move.
Right.
But
which is why the discussions are happening over and over again on the same subject. Legally, Shalini.
If I may just,
yes, of course. Go ahead, Manisha. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. So just a small point. So, the report that we had done on conscious patterns actually has a conscious score. So you can actually take your app through a series of questions and actually understand if your app has dark patterns or not. So I think that's again something useful. And again, maybe as companies, hopefully more and more companies do their audits, this could be a useful tool for them to also.
Yes, a useful tool for sure. Shalini, I was reading that article that you put out in Bar and Bench. It highlights at least 13 categories of dark patterns. But now the question is, how do you distinguish between what can be a persuasive user experience and what is an unlawful dark pattern? Now, as far as legal speak is concerned, how do you draw that line?
See, well, so the list of 13 dark patterns are non-exhaustive. They are already there in the guidelines, which provides for the framework. And, with evolution of UX technology and techniques, there can be many more dark patterns that might come in the market. The ultimate test, I would say, is having a manipulative interface which is subverting or impairing your autonomy to choose or to not choose something.
Correct.
Again, on the application part of the guideline, we were just discussing, the other panelists were, it is very, very wide. So, the guidelines apply to platforms across the board who are offering goods or services, all advertisers, all sellers. It also is applicable to foreign platforms in India. So the applicability is pretty wide.
Yes.
I think what is required here is more awareness.
So more awareness is something that we need more of. But you're also saying that these platforms justify their practices, and we've heard that take coming through from the industry side as well, from Madhav. You heard that. Now, how do you justify these practices as industry norms? Because they can be easily passed at that. Sometimes it's necessary fees as well. That's how it's kind of put across. So how feasible is it to enforce regulations, Shalini, against practices that businesses claim are essential to their business models?
See, from what I could understand, the crux of the entire argument was there is consent from the particular consumer.
Yes.
And that is why it is good and valid.
Right.
But, you just have to see one thing, the mode and manner in which that consent is being derived. And had that mode and manner not been implemented, would that consent be still there?
Right.
And I think that is what I think we need.
Again, it comes down to awareness. Correct.
Yes. Interpretive clarity on the regulations as well.
Correct. Absolutely.
Because as of now, everything is on a non-exhaustive basis.
Sachin, in your breakdown, this digital lending and travel, e-commerce, OTT, they have figured as the worst offenders. What does that tell us about where consumers are turning out to be most vulnerable? Is it sectors that involve a lot of flow of money, urgency, that leans more heavily on dark patterns?
I think it is the sectors, Vikram, that people are using on a daily basis, right? So in metros, you have people using e-commerce or quick commerce to buy things regularly.
Yes.
They have an OTT subscription. They are taking taxis. They're ordering food, right? So all of this, they're buying airline travel tickets, right? So all of these sectors, hence, people have reported the various aspects essentially that have been classified under different categories of those dark patterns that you talked about, right?
Correct.
And as Shalini said, that the legislation is open in the sense that newer dark patterns can be identified. In fact, we have written to the government to add a new dark pattern which is called privacy zuckering. Which is about, manipulation of prices based on, personal data essentially, which is how much in a hurry are you, right? Or what is your phone battery level like to decide what the fare is going to be finally for your taxi ride. I think this is, again, something that the government did not think of in the first place.
Right.
But I think it's something that has evolved. So I think this is going to
And there will be more. It is evolving. Our digital economy is evolving. There will be more patterns. Madhav, as someone who's building this digital business, you think ethical design could actually become a USP? Could we reach a stage where consumers prefer apps that declare themselves dark pattern free?
I think transparency, of course, goes a long way, right?
Yes.
India is a very low trust country. And when customers always start their journey with any of these platforms with distrust, right? That's why cash on delivery is sort of more opted for in the early years of any platform. And that split keeps sort of reversing over years, over cycles. So to build that trust, to build the confidence, it's super important to have transparency. I think while I believe a lot of the dark patterns that you guys stated are not dark patterns and are essentially features for engagement, are essentially sort of enhancing the experience. But I truly feel there are certain platforms which make cancellation very, very frictionful, which make the cancellation process of a subscription very, very tough, right? Which is absolutely outside the application, absolutely outside the flow, right? Those are the real dark patterns that the industry needs to address.
Correct.
Dark patterns in the flow of checkout is not something people need to waste their time on, right?
Yes.
Additional items in the basket, discounted, they always allow you to remove those items off the basket, right? Additional charges, they don't charge anything from your UPI till you actually end up checking out, right? So what ends up happening is we were always focusing on the wrong dark patterns. We need to focus on the right dark patterns.
So which are the right ones and the wrong ones? We are going to go on endlessly about this debate. But Manisha, drip pricing is one of the most common dark patterns. It is everywhere, from airline tickets to food delivery. Do you think banning drip pricing, for one, banning it outright, is even realistic, or should we focus on general transparency and disclosures?
Yeah, I mean, I would just ask, the panelists just sitting here, I mean, have you all felt cheated in some way when you bought something for 100 rupees and then when you checked out, you had to pay 150? So I think it's also a question of what is the trust that you're building, and, to the point that consumers are generally distrustful. And I think if we continue with these practices, then we tell the consumers that the online space is something you have to be very careful about, that
Correct.
It's something you have to kind of always be on guard. And I don't think
But
that's
buyers
great
beware has always been around, no, Manisha?
Sorry?
Buyers beware has always been a credo. It has always been around.
It has, but I think we must all take cognizance of the fact that techniques today and technology today, even as the consumer becomes more and more aware, actually the consumer is more vulnerable today.
Right.
And that is because today it's not really an equal battle. I mean, you have the retailer whose persuasive tactics you could perhaps resist or give in to.
Yes.
But here you also don't know what's actually happening, and you
Exactly.
may not always be so alert.
That's what.
So I think it's the technology that is making consumers a little bit more vulnerable.
Right.
And I think it's in the best interest of businesses to make sure that the online space remains a trusted space.
Trusted space, and you can ensure that with transparency. Of course, many viewers tonight may see dark patterns as more than just a function of design. They're turning out to be a real test right now. How India balances innovation with consumer rights is going to be that space that we are tracking very closely. But thank you to my panelists, Sachin, Madhav, Aparajita, Manisha, Shalini. Thank you. Your expertise has helped us unpack where the risks lie and where the responsibility falls, and how both consumers and platforms can navigate this digital maze, as it were, more ethically. Many thanks for that. And as we log off tonight, we are cognizant of our booming digital economy, no doubt about that, but equally about users who need to stay alert, about platforms that need to stay honest, and regulators have their work quite cut out for them as well. Let's hope the next time we log on, convenience does not come at the cost of clarity. That's the big question this evening on NDTV Profit. I'm Vikram Oza. Thanks for joining us.